Okay, so for my presentation, I settled on the topic of pseudoscience and conspiracy. I feel this is an important topic because the delving out of so much false information is dangerous and something to be taken very seriously. Um, Kaligman's book, Denying AIDS, it was a great look into the pseudoscience of AIDS deniers and gives good emphasis on how dangerous it can be. I mean, people will die because they're ill-informed by other people's personal beliefs and rhetoric that they are passing off as scientific evidence. Um, Science is the most important thing we have, and we need to make sure that our children are being educated correctly, otherwise this world is doomed. Um, so brief history on pseudoscience. It's a study of pseudoscientific theories over time. A pseudoscience is a set of ideals that presents itself as science while it does not meet the criteria to properly be called such. Distinguishing between proper science and pseudoscience is sometimes difficult. One proposal for demarcation between the two is the falsification criterion, most notably attributed to the philosopher Karl Popper. In the history of science and history of pseudoscience, it can be especially hard to separate the two because some sciences developed from pseudosciences. An example of this is the science of chemistry, which traces its origins to pseudoscientific alchemy. The vast diversity in pseudosciences further complicates the history of science. An example, creation science and intelligent design, which were developed in response to the scientific theory of evolution. So here's some examples of pseudoscience and conspiracy: creation science, intelligent design, astrology, acupuncture, ancient astronauts, paranormal phenomenon, reincarnation, channeling, HIV/AIDS deniers, 9/11 truthers, Holocaust deniers, New World Order, apocalyptic prophecies, witchcraft, extrasensory perception. Some of those are just conspiracies as opposed to pseudoscience. Some more examples: dowsing, the Bermuda Triangle, poltergeists, biorhythms, creationism, levitation, cytokinesis, ghosts, psychic detectives, UFOs, remote viewing, Kirlian auras, emotions in plants, life after death, monsters, graphology, cryptozoology, clairvoyance, mediums, pyramid power, faith healing, Bigfoot, psychic prospecting, haunted houses, perpetual motion machines, anti-gravity locations, and amusingly astrological birth control. So it's a pretty vast world of stuff out there that it's pretty important that we make sure is not being taught to our children or misunderstood, because, as I was saying, I mean, it's pretty dangerous. Here's a short video on science denial.
I wanted to make a short video pointing out some pretty amazing science denial and hypocrisy by William Lane Craig. The short of it is that Craig recently called young Earth creationists an embarrassment to Christianity on one of his Reasonable Faith podcasts. That over 50% of evangelical pastors think that the world is less than 10,000 years old. Now, when you think about that, Kevin, that is just hugely embarrassing. That over half of our ministers really believe that the universe is only around 10,000 years old. This is just scientifically, it's nonsense, and yet this is the view that the majority of our pastors hold. It's really quite shocking. Now, Craig calls out the young Earth creationists because they pretty much are in explicit science denial. Now, the hypocrisy of Craig becomes apparent when you consider that he's engaging in much the same science denial, just like any young Earth creationist or Flat Earth Society member. He's just doing it in a more sophisticated way on a rather esoteric area of science that most people don't really know about. Now, this stems from Craig's explicit science denial on the evidence underlying special relativity. Now, I'm going to hit on a few scientific terms here that viewers may not be familiar with. If you'd like some background on exactly what these things are, I highly recommend going back and checking out my 4th video in the Countering the Kalam series, which I'm linking in the description box. Basically, what you need to understand is this. Einstein's special relativity shows that space and time are actually the same substance, a 4-dimensional space-time. Now, the way that Einstein's relativity shows that there is a 4-dimensional space-time is because of what's known as the Lorentz invariance of space and time. And the The long and short of it is that we can confirm the Lorentz invariance of space and time by what's known as the phenomenon as time dilation and length contraction. And this isn't something that we just see in a lab. This is something we have to account for every day when we communicate with satellites in orbit around our planet. And this is a problem for William Lane Craig because he has to admit that if time is part of a four-dimensional space-time, then his Kalam argument for the existence of God does not work, and this contradicts the Christian dogma of creation ex nihilo. Now again, that's a lot of complex topics, so for an explanation, please check out my other video that I'll link in the description box. So, in order to get around this big problem for his argument, Craig denies the existence of a four-dimensional space-time and argues for what's called the Neo-Lorentzian interpretation of relativity. The problem for him is that the core of his Neo-Lorentzian view is unfalsifiable and cannot, in principle, ever have any scientific evidence to confirm it. In fact, the evidence we have for time dilation and length contraction completely discredit the Neo-Lorentzian view. And this is where Craig gets going on his science denial. And we can see this by looking at Craig's own website and his writings on the special relativity and the Neo-Lorentzian view. To quote, "For the characteristic feature of the Lorentzian interpretation is that it rejects Lorentz invariance. On this view, Lorentz invariance is merely apparent, not real." So, just so we're clear, Lorentz invariance means time dilation and length contraction. So, what Craig is saying here is that while we observe time dilation and length contraction, they don't really occur. Now that's pretty bad, but this becomes absurd when you look at what else the Neo-Lorentzian interpretation states. It states there's an absolute privileged reference frame that is undetectable in principle. So as a result of this interpretation, this privileged reference frame is the only reference frame from where time dilation and length contraction would actually not be observed to occur. And now, this goes directly against Occam's razor, postulating a much more complex theory to account for all available data in comparison to the four-dimensional space-time interpretation. So, this is a bit complex, so let's recap. On the Neo-Lorentzian view, Craig has to hold that 1. Length contraction and time dilation are observed to occur. 2. Any test we could ever conduct for length contraction and time dilation will always show that they do occur. 3. Despite this, length contraction and time dilation don't actually happen. 4. In addition, we can never actually gather any empirical evidence that length contraction and time dilation don't actually occur. 5. Craig directly argues that we should accept this rejection of all available empirical evidence based solely on Craig's theological and metaphysical arguments, not based on any kind of scientific evidence. Now, William Lane Craig tries to be artful about this, but when you examine exactly what he's saying, this is explicit science denial. He's denying empirical scientific evidence about the nature of space-time based solely on his theological and metaphysics. Now, there's clearly nothing in science that couldn't be rejected using this methodology. Young Earth creationists could just as easily reject the age of the universe by claiming that the starlight of stars that are hundreds of millions of light years away from Earth really had the light created on its way to the Earth 6,000 years ago. And they could justify believing this based on their theological and metaphysical views. Or they could say deny evolution, stating that while there may be fossil and genetic evidence of evolution in biology, it only appears to happen and doesn't actually occur, and they use the same justification. As a matter of fact, Flat Earth Society members can do the same exact thing with the shape of the Earth. So, what I'd really like to know from William Lane Craig, or any of his supporters on YouTube, is how exactly he can call young Earth creationists an embarrassment to Christianity, but avoid the charge himself.
Okay, so there's kind of an idea of, problems in pseudoscientific thinking. It's just kind of a bit arrogant. It's people making claims and stuff just based on what they want to believe and calling that, what it is, real science fact, when in fact it's not. It's just being selfish. So here's some of the problems. Anecdotes do not make science. Bold statements do not make claims true. Heresy does not equal correctness. Burden of proof. Rumors do not equal reality. Unexplained is not inexplicable. Failures are rationalized, after-the-fact reasoning, coincidence, and representativeness. So my big issue with pseudoscience and the like is that it's harmful for our children growing up in a society that's just ill-informed and pumping all this incorrect information into them. Here's an example of something like that. A real 4th grade science quiz. Dinosaurs, Genesis and the Gospel. As you can see here, I mean, it's beyond ridiculous that this would even be in, you know, public school. It's really just, I don't know. I just don't even know what to think about it. It's pretty shameful. And I'd like to reiterate here, you know, this isn't about religion or pseudoscience. It's about science. And this is not science, and it does not belong in a science class, ever. So on my way out, I'm going to leave you with a great quote from a great scientist who does a lot of work in the scientific community and trying to educate people and make sure that our kids are growing up knowing, you know, right from wrong. And that's Bill Nye. If your religion is consistent with science, consider tempering your beliefs. For me, the claims of creationism are completely unreasonable. Judge Jones in Dover, Pennsylvania, used the expression breathtaking inanity, meaning so empty, so silly that it took his breath away. The age of the Earth is very close to 4.54 billion years, rather than a millionth of that time. The idea that fossils were buried in the Earth by some hidden deity to test one's faith is completely unsatisfactory. We can observe the processes of evolution, physics, and especially geology everywhere, every day. To deny what I see around me is unacceptable to me. Science is the acceptance of what you observe and seeking the natural laws that cause these effects. And I agree wholeheartedly. I believe that we need to educate our children because it's important. And I guess that's my presentation. Thank you for being our professor this semester, and have a great summer. Thanks.